On a chilly November morning in downtown Clearwater, the city moved on as it always did, hustling, honking, coffee in hand. And no one noticed the old man on the park bench. He sat near the edge of the square, just beside the fountain where children played in warmer months. His coat was frayed, shoes split at the seams, and a faded green duffel bag rested at his feet. His beard was gray, uneven. His knuckles were bruised, maybe from the cold, maybe from something else. People passed him without a second glance. A few stepped aside. One man threw a quarter near the bench without stopping. His name was Walter Briggs, though no one knew it. To them, he was just another homeless man blending into the cement. Walter didn't ask for money. He didn't hold a sign. He just sat with his back straight, staring into the distance as if waiting for someone only he remembered. That morning, a group of teenagers lounged near the food truck parked nearby. Loud, restless, and full of energy, they noticed Walter. "Bet he used to be in the army," one said with a smirk. "Or at least thinks he was. Dude probably just watched too many war movies," another added. They laughed, too loudly for the space they were in. One of the teens pulled out his phone and zoomed in on Walter's face. "This'll be great for my story. Veterans Day special, Forgotten Grandpa." They chuckled as he clicked the shutter. Walter didn't move, but his right hand tightened around the strap of his duffel bag. His lips pressed into a thin line. Still, he said nothing. Across the square, a middle-aged man sitting on a bench nearby shifted uncomfortably. He'd heard the laughter. He'd seen the phone. He didn't know the old man, but something about him, something in his posture, his silence, felt different. Something told him this wasn't just anyone. But for the crowd in the square, Walter was invisible. Until he reached into his bag. And everything changed. The laughter didn't stop. As the group of teens huddled around the phone, zooming in on Walter's face, their jokes grew crueler. "Someone get this guy a comb or a shower," one muttered. "Maybe he's got war flashbacks every time a pigeon flies by," another snickered. Walter didn't react. He sat still, staring at nothing, as if their voices belonged to a different world. But not everyone ignored it. The man on the nearby bench, his name was Derek Mason, a retired firefighter, watched carefully. He didn't know the old man, but something didn't sit right. The stillness wasn't weakness. It was something else. Something familiar. "Hey," Derek called out to the teens. "That enough?" One of the boys turned. "Relax, man. Just having fun. Try having some respect," Derek said firmly. "You don't know who he is." That's when one of the teens, the one with the phone, walked closer to Walter. He crouched down, holding the phone like a reporter. "So, what's your story, Pops?" he asked mockingly. "You fight in the great napkin wars of the 60s? You lose your medals in a poker game." His friends laughed. Walter slowly turned his head, locking eyes with the boy for the first time. There was no anger, only something deeper, something quiet and heavy. "No," Walter said. His voice was raspy but clear. "I lost them in Cunner Province. 1971. I got most of them back, except the ones I left behind with my men." The teen froze for a second, not knowing what to say. Derek straightened on the bench. "Cunner Province," he echoed under his breath. "That's not something you Google. That's something you survive." Walter reached down, unzipping the side of his worn duffel bag. The crowd around the square barely noticed until they saw what he pulled out. It wasn't money. It wasn't a weapon. It was a wooden case, small, square, worn at the edges. He opened it. Inside, resting against a velvet lining, was a Medal of Honor. Gasps broke the air. Even the pigeons fluttered away. The teen stepped back. One of them whispered, "That's real?" Derek stood up, now visibly shaken. He walked slowly toward Walter, removing his baseball cap as he approached. He looked at the medal, then back at the man holding it. "I've only seen one of those in person," Derek said. "And it wasn't in the hands of someone sitting on a park bench." Walter looked at him and said calmly, "That's where most of us end up. Not on magazine covers. Just trying to sit somewhere warm." The crowd had started to gather. Phones were down. Voices were hushed. Even the teens had nothing left to say. For the first time that morning, people saw not just a homeless man, but a soldier. A hero. And the silence that followed said more than any apology could. The square had changed. Only minutes earlier, it was filled with careless laughter and half-eaten lunch wraps. Now, a crowd stood in hushed silence, united by disbelief and shame. At the center of it all sat Walter Briggs, the invisible old man, with the Medal of Honor resting in his scarred hands. The velvet case trembled slightly on his lap, not from nerves, but from the weight it had always carried. The teens who mocked him now stood frozen, faces drained of color. I didn't know," one of them stammered. Walter looked up, his eyes steady. "That's the problem," he said quietly. "Most people don't want to know." A woman in her 30s stepped forward, wiping tears from her eyes. She knelt beside the bench. "My grandfather served," she whispered. "He never talked about it. I wish I had asked." Walter nodded. "Some things we leave behind so others can sleep." Behind them, Derek Mason stood with his hat in hand. His voice cracked with emotion. "I worked with veterans my whole life. I've never seen one carry that medal in a bag," he said. Walter offered a faint smile. "That's because it's not for show. It's for remembering." Suddenly, a soft voice spoke from the back of the crowd. "Excuse me, sir. What did you do to earn it?" A boy, no older than 10, stepped forward. His voice was small, but his eyes were full of something rarely seen in children: respect. Walter looked at him for a long moment. The noise around them faded. "I pulled 2 men out of a burning transport after it hit an IED, he began. "Then stayed behind to drag the last one who couldn't move. Took a round in the shoulder doing it. Almost lost my leg. I was the last one out." He paused. "They gave me this for that," he said, gesturing to the medal. "But I only ever wear it in my memory, when I wake up sweating in the middle of the night, hearing them scream." The boy didn't flinch. He just said, "Thank you." Walter looked away quickly, his throat tightening. Across the square, an older man in a suit pushed through the crowd. His hair was white, but his steps were firm. A small pin glinted on his lapel, airborne wings. He stopped in front of Walter and gave a crisp salute. "Colonel David Ellsworth, 82nd Airborne," he said. "I lost a man in Cunner. Name was Sergeant Bell. You wouldn't happen to know." Walter's voice broke in. "James Bell, machine gunner. Took shrapnel in the neck. I held him until the medics got there." Colonel Ellsworth nodded, lips trembling. "He was my brother." The silence returned, this time not from shame, but reverence. People lowered their phones. Some began to cry. One of the teens stepped forward, eyes watery. He looked at Walter and said, "I'm sorry, sir." Walter didn't scold him. He didn't speak. He just reached out, gently placed the Medal of Honor back in the box, and closed it with care. Then he looked up and said, "Apology accepted, if you remember this tomorrow." The boy nodded. "I will." A few feet away, someone began to clap, soft at first, then louder. Soon the square was filled with the sound of applause. But Walter didn't stand. He didn't bow. He simply nodded once, quietly, and placed the box back in his duffel bag. He had no desire to be worshipped, only to be seen. And now, for the first time in years, he was. The applause eventually faded, but the silence that followed was different than before. This time, it wasn't ignorance, it was reverence. Walter Briggs didn't move from his bench. He sat as he always had, quiet, still, grounded. But the world around him had changed. People who once avoided eye contact now lingered nearby. Some offered gentle nods. Others simply stood in quiet reflection, unsure what to say, but finally understanding that there was more to him than rags and a tired face. A young woman approached first. She handed him a cup of coffee from the vendor across the street. "Black, no sugar," she said softly. "My dad used to drink it like that. He served in Desert Storm." Walter took the cup slowly. "Thank you," he said, and for the first time all morning, his voice held warmth. The teenagers who had mocked him stood together a few feet away, unsure whether they should leave or apologize again. Derek Mason walked over to them. He didn't yell. He simply said, "You boys made a mistake. You can't take it back, but you can grow from it." The one who had taken the photo nodded. "Can we do something to help him?" Derek looked back at Walter, then at the boy. "Why don't you start by asking his name and using it with respect?" The boy approached Walter, hat now removed, head low. "Sir, I'm sorry for everything," he said. "My name's Tyler. What's yours?" Walter looked at him, measured his sincerity, then nodded. Walter Briggs." Tyler reached out his hand. Walter shook it, slow and firm. Across the park, someone had filmed the moment when Walter revealed the Medal of Honor. That video was now being shared on social media, captioned simply, "He was mocked for being homeless." Then he opened his bag. Within an hour, thousands had seen it. By evening, veterans groups across the country were trying to identify Walter. One local news station sent a reporter to the park, but Walter declined to be interviewed. "I'm not a story," he said quietly. "I'm just a man who lost a lot and lived anyway." Derek Mason later found Walter still sitting on the bench as the sun began to fall. "You need a place to stay?" he asked. Walter gave a soft smile. "This bench has served me just fine." But Derek persisted. "You deserve better than this." Walter looked around the park, then down at his duffel bag. "I had brothers once who would have said the same thing. They're the reason I'm still breathing. If you're offering something warm and quiet, I'll take it. Just don't put me on a pedestal." Derek nodded. "No pedestals, just a couch. And respect." That night, Walter Briggs slept indoors for the first time in years. Not because someone rescued him, but because someone saw him. The next morning, the park bench sat empty for the first time in months. Walter Briggs wasn't there. Instead, a folded piece of cardboard rested on the seat, carefully tucked under a cup of black coffee. On it, someone had written in neat block letters, "If you sat here, you sat beside a hero. Clearwater Vets Club." Inside Derek Mason's modest home on the edge of town, Walter stirred awake beneath a warm blanket. For once, he didn't start the day with the stiffness of cold concrete in his joints. He took a slow breath and sat up, blinking against the morning light. On the table near the window sat his duffel bag, cleaned, patched, and next to it, the wooden box. The Medal of Honor still rested inside, just as it had for decades. But now, it meant something different. It no longer lived in silence. It no longer sat forgotten. It had been seen. He had been seen. Downstairs, Derek poured 2 mugs of coffee and said, "They're hosting something at the community center tonight. Veteran appreciation. You don't have to go. But they're asking about you." Walter gave a half smile. "Funny. Spent most of my life trying not to be noticed." Derek shrugged. "Sometimes the quietest heroes get the loudest echoes, just a little later than they deserve." That evening, Walter stood at the back of the room, just watching. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't speak. He just nodded respectfully as names were read and photos displayed. But as the night ended, a small girl walked over to him, no more than 8 years old. She held a crayon drawing of a man in a green coat, a shiny medal on his chest, and the words, "Thank you for being brave," scribbled in red at the top. She handed it to him without saying a word, then skipped back to her seat. Walter looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he folded it gently, tucked it into his coat pocket, right next to the letter that came with the medal all those years ago. And for the first time in a lifetime, he smiled, not just with his mouth, but with his whole face.
If this story touched your heart, we'd be honored to have you with us. Each day we share quiet moments that remind us what still matters. You can subscribe below to join us.